Are MCP servers blocked for you in your organization? Are plugins causing you problems? Well, we might have a solution to these issues that you might be facing. Charles, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, let's cover what problems people might encounter with MCP servers. So as you said, Josh, sometimes they are blocked, and I'm noticing it a lot with clients that they're blocking MCP servers because they're worried about what people will be able to do with them, and it's taking them a long time to get them unblocked. MCP servers have limited actions. You only have the ability to perform the actions that have been included in the MCP server. So it's not going to be as good necessarily as a full-fledged API. There can be compatibility issues depending on how the MCP server has been set up. So like, Josh, you had an instance where you were struggling to get an MCP server into Claude Code, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. With a Dataverse MCP server, I've struggled in the past to get that working with Claude Code, but it worked fine with Copilot. It worked fine with GitHub Copilot. So yeah, that's something that I've seen as well as issues where it just won't work with my AI tooling of choice.
And then, of course, there's the context bloat. So if you have that MCP server installed and your agent knows about it, every time you speak to your agent, it's listing all of those actions in its prompt. And then that's context bloat. You get maybe tens of MCP servers in your chat, and then suddenly that's a lot of information. And then there are plugins. So you could use a plugin instead to achieve what you want to achieve. Plugins also have their own issues. So again, they can be blocked by your organization. For the Microsoft plugins, like the Code Apps plugin, for example, that's CLI only unless you adapt it yourself. Yeah, again, that can be an issue. Potentially outdated. Something that we noticed with the Code Apps plugin is the version number wasn't being updated. So then it was becoming outdated, even if you told it to force an update. So yeah, quite a few different issues that you can have with these things, but we actually have a solution for this. And this is our solution. Might not look like much at first, but essentially it's a skill. Instead of using the Dataverse MCP server, instead of using, say, a Code Apps plugin to interact with Dataverse in our example, and this can be applied to other things, what we've done is we've created a skill for it. And the cleverness of this skill is that it utilizes the same authentication method as the new Code Apps, or it's a Power App CLI. So it's this new NPM package, which if we open up our package.json, is this one, Microsoft Power Apps CLI, and it's a new package. So using this package, we can then authenticate ourselves with Dataverse in an environment, and then using our skill, we can then basically say to it, can you perform these actions in Dataverse? And it is essentially as simple as that. And so this skill that we've got for Dataverse was generated by AI. The way that it authenticates, it has this modular JavaScript file, was created by AI. So the skill itself, it needs to choose an environment because you need to know where you're going to work with Dataverse. Environments are called Dataverse environments. So each one has its own Dataverse instance. So we'll need to provide it with the URL as an example here. And then once it's got that, it can authenticate. And as I said, it's using this new Power Apps CLI. So it uses that to find out the status of authentication, logging in the user. It can switch accounts if it needs to, and then it connects to Dataverse. And it uses the authentication tokens that exist via this package, Microsoft Power Apps CLI. So we're using Microsoft's technology in order to do that.
So just to maybe make it clearer for the audience then. So where this differs from an MCP server, for example, is you can't really interact manually with an MCP to get the data you want back. You rely on AI to do it. Whereas this, we're using technology or, tooling that you could use manually to interface with Dataverse, right? But we're just giving AI that context so that it can do it itself.
Yeah, that's right. And where we were talking about things like the limitations of the MCP server, where it's telling us specifically which actions we can use, anything outside of that we can't do. Here we're using the Dataverse Web API, which means we can do anything the Dataverse Web API allows us to do, which is so many more actions than you could do with the MCP server. So we've basically unlocked the door
And as a result of that, I assume that the skill, and when AI is interfacing with this skill, if there's any updates in the API or anything like that, it's gonna find them. It's gonna know about them potentially before we even do. So it's always going to be up to date and know about that, right?
Well, so the way that this works is that it relies on the model's training data to understand how to interact with the web API. So all this skill really is doing is making it easy for you to get authenticated to the Dataverse Web API. And then whichever model you choose, like for example, if we have a look at the model we've got here, we've got the new MyCode 1.1 Flash from Microsoft. That model will be the one that will decide what Dataverse Web API calls are possible or not. So if there is a new command, a new API call that you want to use, you'll need to provide that to your agent. But you can just provide a link to the documentation and say, here's everything you can do. This is what I want you to do.
Sounds good. So it seems like it's a really flexible way of doing things. None of the downsides of MCP servers, but all of the upsides of APIs and interfacing with things as you would maybe have done before AI. So I'm really curious to see maybe what we can do with this. Should we give take it for a spin?
Let's do it. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to open up our terminal. So here I've opened it up. And then what we want to do is just do npm i, because we just need to get the packages in this package.json installed first, because of course it's going to use them. So these are the three packages that we looked at. It's the Power Apps CLI, and then these other two are to do with the Microsoft authentication. So it's a library from Microsoft that helps us to authenticate against our environment, basically helps us to log into our tenant. And that's installed. So now that that's installed, we can essentially go to our chat window and then just start talking to it about what we want it to do. We can choose any model for this, but I would try to choose a more modern model, because then it will be trained on more recent data, which will mean if Microsoft have changed the Dataverse Web API, which I'm not actually sure how regularly they do that, but if they have, then it will have the most recent updates or more recent updates. What model would you choose, Josh?
I'm a Claude fanboy, so I'd probably gravitate towards maybe Claude model. Sonnet 5 is my jam when I'm doing a lot of things, occasionally Opus. So yeah, I'd probably gravitate towards that personally. But it's personal choice, right? Any model's probably going to be more or less okay with this kind of thing. Obviously, just pick a more modern model like you mentioned.
And you'd be happy with medium thinking?
I think so, yeah, I should be fine.
Excellent. So one thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to go into our environment, and we're going to need to get that URL from the environment. So I'm in my Charlie Dev environment here. Let's go to our session details. So just up into the settings cog, session details, and then let's highlight the URL for our environment, because that's what we're going to provide to our agent. So now we can say to it, I want you to create a Dataverse solution called Hello Friend, with the publisher of Charles Sexton, and I would like you to create a Dataverse table in there for anything that you would like, and then seed it with some data. All right, there we go. And it's trying to start some MCP servers, but we don't want those MCP servers. Should have checked that beforehand. This is the thing as well, like you might start your conversation, not realize, well, actually, I've got a bunch of MCP servers in here and I don't want to use them.
But it picked up the skill straight away after you did that, which was good. I noticed it popped up there, so it's good that it's seen that.
So I just pasted in my URL and it's asking me very nicely. And then we have another question here. So which cloud is the environment in? Interesting. So I didn't even realize that it asked me that, but yeah, it's just a public one. And then it's asking us if it can run this command because it wants to check the authentication status. So it's doing its thinking here. It's saying it's planning to set up a publisher named Charles Sexton, but I believe I already have one. So we'll see what happens with that. So this is, of course, something where you could tell it to go off and do whatever you want it to do, and then you continue with other work that you're working on and just leave it to it. It's not something that you typically just sit and watch.
Yeah. I think as a side note as well, it's really nice that we are getting the tools to be able to create all of this stuff in Power Platform without actually having to go to the interface to create it manually. Like, it's been so tedious in the past to do that, whereas now we can do it all via command line interface, and with AI, it makes things a lot more tolerable, I would say, because there's a lot of tedious stuff in there when you get to it.
So it's going to create a book table. As I say, this publisher does exist, I believe. So we'll see what happens if it maybe encounters a failure with that. Should really have checked it. Maybe I should improve the skill to say always check for a publisher. I'm not sure. We'll see. But the point of this really is that you can create these skills yourself, talk to AI about it, and you'll notice that there's an error that's coming up there, but AI is going to figure us out. So you can create these skills, and then it means you don't need an MCP server, you don't need a plugin, and it gives you a wide range of things that you can do that you wouldn't be able to do in those limited experiences. But it also does highlight that why are people blocking, or why are organizations blocking MCP servers when you can still do what you need to do anyway? And you can do it in an even freer manner, which has even less kind of security around it, even less guardrails.
Raises a valid point, doesn't it? Maybe it's a fear of the unknown because MCPs are still relatively new in the grand scheme of things, whereas APIs have been around for a while. But if you're allowing an API, the question, why would you block an MCP? Because you're just going to route people to go that way anyway. So yeah, maybe, if you're blocking the API, then block the MCP as well, or vice versa, but don't leave one or the other unblocked, I would say.
Yeah, so it's noticing that the publisher already exists, and now it's saying the solution already exists. So maybe when it ran the first run of it, it actually created that solution. You can go and have a look. Yeah, so it did create that solution. So we'll see what it figures out now. What it should really figure out is I've already created the solution, so let's utilize that and then insert the table and seed the table with some records as well. So it's created some things. So if we go and look in here, has it created it inside of the solution? Yep. And then if we go to book, so it hasn't done the seeding yet. So that's the next thing that's working on. But I mean, if we were creating these things manually, maybe it would have taken around the same amount of time. But if we start to create much more and we're doing it all in one go, it's always going to be faster to use AI for it. So it's saying now that it's done it.
It's the economies of scale, isn't it? The more you need to do, the longer it's going to take manually, whereas AI is going to just whiz through that a lot quicker.
Yeah. And also, I would always be curious to see what I can get away with as far as the model is concerned. So we're using Sonnet 5, which is a medium cost model. What happens if we use, say, not GPT Sol, if we use, say, GPT Luna, or we use Haiku or Gemini 3.7 Flash, for example, which has just been released into VS Code. So cheaper cost, can we still do exactly the same things? That's what I'd be interested to know. Maybe we can get away with it being much cheaper.
And that's where the skill can maybe help with that as well, right? If you have a more comprehensive skill where maybe you're pointing to bits of documentation, say around the Web API, it might be more aware of what's going on and be able to kind of process that and deal with things in a way that makes sense. Versus if it didn't have that and it just went on a complete tangent.
Yeah, and I think that this goes back to what we've shown with agentic workflows, which is where you really want to plan out what you're doing first. So plan out your schema first, plan out how you're going to seed the database tables if you are going to do that. And then you pass that to the cheap model and say, yeah, just go off and build it. And what you might have noticed in the thinking that we had with our model is that it actually asked to go off and check the documentation for the Dataverse Web API. And that's what a good model will do. So hopefully, even with these cheaper models, they'll still go off and do that so that they can understand the structure. But we didn't need the Dataverse MCP server. We didn't need a plugin. We got a solution created. We decided on the publisher. We got a table created. We got it seeded with some data. So easy. And we can do anything with the Dataverse Web API that is possible with the Dataverse Web API, just like that.
Yeah, it's like magic, isn't it, really? It's so good. And in terms of the skill itself, is that something that we want to make available to our audience?
Absolutely. I'm very happy to put this onto GitHub. And then if people want to have a look at it, they want to improve it, feel free, go ahead. But now you don't need the Dataverse MCP server if you're just wanting to create some tables and seed some data. So thank you for watching this. I hope you found it useful. I'm really curious to know what your comments are. So please leave comments about this. Do you think it's good, bad? Are you indifferent about it? Has this saved you because you were trying to get access to an MCP server and you couldn't? Like I said earlier, this doesn't have to apply just to Dataverse. Maybe there's another MCP server that you want to use and it's blocked and you could just use the API instead. Just create your own method for doing that. Create your own skill and you get AI to help you with that. So yeah, thanks for watching and we'll see you on the next one.